send it to Baghdad as a trophy. They drag it in the dirt. They chop the heads off of statues of Mary. You know, things that are actually happening today as well. In one city, the capital
today in Europe.
In Brussels and that happens all the time. You know, I mean, I know they actually reported that one, but this every year because I follow what happens numerous during Christmas and even not Christmas. Christians did. The crosses and statues are defecated on, and the altars smeared with urine and all kinds of graphic stuff, which happened back then too. So the continuity is staggering. But anyway, so these Turks are just running amok and slaughtering. Ani was the capital of Armenia. It was known as a city of 1,001 churches. Each and every one of them was pillaged, plundered, and burned to the ground. Okay, so when you talk about the Armenian genocide of the early 20th century, it actually really began a millennium before that, because what I'm talking about is exactly 1,000 years earlier. Now that's going on, and at the same time that that's happening, pilgrims from Europe had always been known to the Holy Land. Okay, and you know, depending on the Muslim governor, or you know, they would have a deal. For example, Charlemagne had a deal with Harun al-Rashid, and basically it was peaceful. They can come and do their pilgrimage to the holy sites, but they had to, of course, pay. And even then, they would get attacked, of course, because the mob would rise up for whatever reason. But with the Seljuks, during this time that I'm telling you, it got really bad for European travelers. Okay, they were constantly being attacked. They would force more money out of them, and when they get the money, they kick them out and say, you still can't go pilgrimage. And the worst one happened in 1064. It's widely documented. And it was a German pilgrimage that came, and you know, they described a head nun, an abbess was there, who was of comely appearance, and they told her, don't go, it's dangerous. And lo and behold, they slaughtered everyone, the Turks, and gang raped her. They raped her to death, essentially. And then Chronicle writes, and they did this often to everyone. Okay, so that is what, this is the First Crusade. Now we've...
It's a reliable source, you think?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so this news, is it getting all the way to Western Europe?
Yeah, it's getting... Okay, so first, the emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire, the Byzantine Emperor Alexius, he is dealing with these Turkic attacks on Asia Minor, okay, and now they're very close to him in Constantinople, and he calls for aid. He's actually the main reason. But also European pilgrims from Europe directly who are going and pilgrimage are suffering, and reports are reaching Europe as well. So it's those two things. And so that's the backdrop of the First Crusade. It was just more of the usual, but in an even fiercer form under the Turks. And now, for whatever reason, it's funny because there were calls to crusades before the First Crusade. So one of the most, you know, in 1009, so this is well over a century before the First Crusade. No, I'm sorry, it's not. It's under a century. Okay, it's about 75 to 80 years. The Egyptian Fatimid Caliph Hakim al-Mullah, to prove his bona fides, because he was a Shia. Shias were actually ruling Egypt. Many people don't realize that. They don't realize that Al-Azhar, this bastion of Sunni learning, was actually built and was a Shia madrasa in its origins. But he actually systematically, according to Muslim sources, destroyed 30,000 churches and synagogues in Egypt and Syria, which again shows you how Christian that area was. And he even destroyed the Holy Sepulchre, which is where every Christian went for pilgrimage, which was built upon where Jesus was believed to have.
And remind me what year that was.
1009.
1009, okay, yeah, gotcha.
And at that time, the Pope at the time tried to call for a crusade, even though they never had it. And there was a lot of anger, and a lot of people wanted to, but nothing came of it.
Okay, so when the Sepulchre, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, is destroyed, that's actually when the first crusade is called for?
No, that's when a Pope tried to call for something like a crusade, but it didn't come to pass.
And before then, though, was there not an idea of crusades against pagans? Is that again, am I going to, because later there were crusades against pagans in Finland.
Yeah.
But earlier, when, let's say, King Alfred was fighting the Great Heathen Army, was that conceptualized the same way, or was that a separate thing?
No, the crusade idea, it begins against Islam and then later morphs against pagan peoples. Okay. But in its origins, it's not with King Alfred. There are, again, hints of it in the 8th and 9th centuries. For example, when Rome was attacked by Saracen pirates in, I want to say something like 850-ish. Several popes would basically, the whole thing about the crusades is, you know, the indulgence. That if you commit and you fight and you die, okay, it's not that you go to heaven. The way many people also don't understand the whole indulgence business. It's not like it's basically, it was tied up to the idea of purgatory. Okay, so you're saved, okay, because you were baptized and you were washed by Christ. But because you sin, you know, the purgatory idea is there, so you have to suffer through purgatory. Going into the Crusades, what that did is it would alleviate the sufferings, because now you're doing good, so that should take away from the time that you're going to suffer in purgatory. That's all it was, because a lot of people have a misunderstanding, thinking it's kind of like, oh, if you go and fight, you go to heaven. You know, it wasn't that. It was more about lessening the sufferings of purgatory, which is kind of a Catholic idea. Okay.
Okay, so they tied it into that was coming from the Pope himself.
Yeah. Okay. That's what the indulgences were, which I think, in other words, they're not as bad as what people think it is. But a lot of people think it was just kind of like, hey, you know, go fight, and if you die, you're going to heaven.
Okay, so it's worth touching on the theology here, a little bit, because this is really, seems to me, radically different from the teachings of Christ. So to have a Pope go into that length, and it's also radically different from where we are today, and the Church calling for any such thing. You know, Christ, if you look at his actions and behavior through the Gospels, it is so, there's no violence.
Except for that thing in the temple and whip.
Which humans did he hurt? Well, he threw up some tables.
And threw tables, but it says he drove out the animals and the humans.
Driving out?
Yeah, okay. But it's an act of violence. It's not, I mean, this isn't passive.
Well, how are you finding violence then?
Making a whip, throwing things over, and it sounds like he's whipping animals and humans out of a temple. That sounds kind of violent. It's not exactly passive.
All right, if that's the take,
I'm
that's the only take
I'm
I'll
going
take.
with you.
Let me,
Yeah.
you know.
I'm not trying. I'm going in
Sure,
the
fair enough.
spirit that you're going with, but I'm saying there is that.
Well, there's also the famous case when he's in the Garden of Gethsemane and Simon Peter smites one of the people coming to take him away, and Jesus says, "Live by the sword, die by the sword," and heals the person who's had his ear lopped off. So Jesus' message is one of peace, and his whole life, it's healing, or his whole mission, time mission.
Well, this is a great topic. Yeah.
So it's drastically different. The famous piece of scripture that is brought up is when Jesus says, "I've come."
I bring a sword.
by the sword. And it's also the case that he said, I came here to divide. He doesn't say, he's not a softie and a hippy dippy in any way. If you actually, but nevertheless, apart from your one case that he might have been